All right. I have pressed the button.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. So last year I did a tech talk about Go and artificial intelligence, and at the end of that, I predicted that it would be about 10 years before a Go AI could beat a professional player in an even game. And I was off by about 9 years and 6 months or so. That was the generally accepted wisdom at the time, though. Pretty much everyone agreed that it was a long way off. But we were wrong. Last week, Google announced that they had created a new AI and it had played a pro in October and beaten him in an even game. So this was huge news for AI and for the Go community. So I'm going to talk about that today. First, we'll talk about the match between AlphaGo and Fanwei, who is the professional. I'm going to talk about how AlphaGo works. Then we're going to take a look at the games that they played. Don't worry if you don't play Go. I am still hoping to present this in a way that you can understand what I'm talking about. And then we'll talk about what's next. So this is the result of the match. Fanwei was not very happy. It turns out he actually lost all 5 games in the match.
Whoa.
AlphaGo won by 2.5 in the first game and then won the other 4 games by resignation. So it was a pretty convincing performance. They also played 5 informal games. They had agreed in advance that some of the games would be formal and some would be informal, and they had different time controls. So the informal ones didn't count for the official match, but AlphaGo won the informal games 3-2. So the main difference there was that in the formal games, the players each had 1 hour of main time and then an extra 30 seconds per move after they ran out of main time. And in the informal games, they just had 30 seconds per move. So it was a little bit tougher time controls in the informal games. So what were the reactions to this? This is the Onion's reaction. The pro community was obviously shocked. Pretty much everyone was shocked by this. Everyone until last week thought this was 10 years away. The pros that have looked at the games sort of fell into 2 camps. Some people said that AlphaGo is clearly a professional level Go player, and some said that it might not quite be a professional level. So some were a little more skeptical. One of the more interesting comments I saw was by the #1 player in the world by ELO ranking. He said that when he got the game records, it didn't have the names of the players on them, and he actually couldn't tell which one was the computer and which one was the human. So it was that was pretty interesting to me. Normally when you have a computer playing Go, they play strangely. It doesn't seem like a human is playing. It kind of jumps around. It seems like at some points in the game it doesn't know what's going on, or it just sort of leaves the local area for no apparent reason. Just has a different feeling to it. And AlphaGo does not feel that way. AlphaGo feels like you were playing an intelligence. So it's a pretty interesting thing. What is it that makes Go AI hard? Well, Go is a complete information game. So AI for Go, a perfect AI for Go could just be an enormous tree search, except that you don't have time to search such a large tree. It just figured out how many possible positions there are in Go, and the number had over 100 digits in it, so it was an extremely large number. Even if you just want to search some positions around the current position you're in the game, the branching factor is very high. So in chess AIs, they got a lot of power by just searching the tree. In Go, there's an average of 200 legal moves at any position. And even evaluating a single position is difficult. There are non-local effects, so a move played in one part of the board can affect some other part of the board drastically. And there also is a consideration of territory versus thickness. So the ultimate goal in Go is to get territory, surround areas of the board. But early in the game, you can actually spend moves building up power that you will use to fight later. So any AI that's going to be able to evaluate a position has to be able to balance those 2 things. It has to see that even though, say, black hasn't made much territory, he's built up a lot of thickness, and that's going to pay off later. So it's pretty hard to even look at a single position and evaluate it and see who's winning. I went into a lot more detail about this last year, so I'm not going to talk about it more here. But that talk is out there if anybody's interested. All right, so how does AlphaGo work? AlphaGo uses neural networks and Monte Carlo tree search. So before AlphaGo, the best Go programs used Monte Carlo tree search. AlphaGo has some really powerful neural networks that are helping it decide what moves to play or to investigate further. There are three policy networks that they used when they were building AlphaGo. They had a supervised learning network, a reinforcement learning network, and a fast rollout policy network. The goal of these networks is to look at a board position and then choose moves that look promising. There's also a value neural network, which looks at a position and tells us how good it is. And then they apply tree search using these networks to evaluate positions and decide what move to play eventually. So the supervised learning network is a 13-layer deep convolutional neural network. You'll have to talk to Emanuele if you want to know what that actually means. It was trained from 30 million positions from a popular Go server called KGS. They chose games by the strongest amateur players on the server, 6 to 9 Dan amateurs, and that took 3 weeks. So they ran they kept running the network and adjusting weights until they got it to perform the way they wanted it to, and that took 3 weeks of runtime. The goal of this network was to predict the next move. So they would give it a position in one of these games, and then it would try to predict what the next move in the game was going to be. So it wound up with an accuracy of 57% using all of their tricks. But if they didn't give it as many input features, they gave it a much simpler input representation, it still was almost as good. It had about a 56% chance, looking at only the current board position and the history of that game. So that's the first step. The next step was to take this network, which right now was just predicting the next move in these strong amateur games, and try to make it stronger. So they had what they called a reinforcement learning network. And what this one is going to do is predict the best move. It's not necessarily going to predict the next move that was played in some existing game. It's going to find the best move that it can. This one's kind of slow. It takes 3 milliseconds to run it on a board position and predict a move. It had exactly the same structure as the supervised learning network, and it started out identical to that network. But what they did is have it play against itself, and then they adjust the weights to try to make it stronger. So they can tell if they're going in the right direction by whether it beats the older version of the network. You can think of tuning a neural network as, one way to think about it is as a landscape. You can think of it as sort of a hilly landscape, and you have some function that you're either trying to maximize or minimize. In this case, what they were doing is trying to predict which move would be strongest, and they're trying to minimize the error in those predictions. So they're looking for the lowest point on the landscape. The problem with this is that it's a multi-dimensional landscape. It's not 3-dimensional. It's more like 1,000 dimensions or something like that. So it's very hard to find the low point on such a landscape. They ran this network on 1.2 million training games. So it played itself 1.2 million times, and that took about a day. And when they were done, they had made this network stronger. It played the old network, the supervised learning network, and it would won 80% of its games against that network. Then they had it play Pachi, which is an open source Go AI, and it beat Pachi 85% of the time. Now this is only using the policy network, so this is not doing any tree search or anything else. This is just running the network, having it predict a move, and then playing that move. So that's pretty amazing stuff. They had a third policy network that they built, which is much faster. So this is a simpler, lightweight network that does the same thing. Again, it's trying to predict the best move, but it runs in 2 microseconds. So this is 1,500 times faster than, did I do that right? I don't know. Maybe it's about 1,000 times faster, let's say, than the other network. Basically, this is so much faster because they're going to use it to play out the rest of the game and predict what's going to happen. So this is one way of evaluating positions. And then there's a value network whose job is to look at the current position in the game and output who's going to win. It gives a probability that the current player will win the game from this position. So this is used to evaluate positions and see if they're good for black or for white. Initially, when they trained this network, they gave it the same games to train on as the other networks, and the error came out at 0.37. 0.5 is pure chance. 0.37 is better than that. But it turns out that what really had happened is that it had just memorized those games. So what the network was doing was essentially looking at the position, remembering which game it was from, and then saying, oh yeah, black won that game. And so it wasn't actually very good at predicting things on games that it hadn't seen before. So they needed to come up with a different approach on that. Instead, what they did is they had the reinforcement learning network play itself something like 1.6 billion times, and then they took a position from each one of those games and used all of those positions to train the network, and that reduced the error quite a bit. So it's around 0.23 now. That's the mean squared error, I think it was. So at this point, when they had trained the value network to that level, it actually was just as good as the best Go programs that were out there before AlphaGo. So just by running the value network on each of the possible moves at the current position, it could compete with the best programs that existed. And this is just one piece of AlphaGo. So in the end, they put all these pieces together. They took the supervised learning network. It was actually supposed to be weaker than the one that had played itself and gotten better. But it turns out it's better at handling a wider diversity of moves. So that's actually what they plugged in for the final version. They built the value network from the reinforcement learning network. So the one that turned out to be stronger, they did a regression on that and created the value network from it. And it turns out that was the best way to create the value network. And then they put it on some pretty good hardware. So they had one machine that would run it that had 40 threads, 48 CPUs, and 8 GPUs. And then they built a distributed version that ran 40 threads on 1,200 CPUs and 176 GPUs. And it came out pretty strong. So here's a representation of how the training went. On the left at the bottom, you can see a bunch of human expert positions. And we use those on the left arrow here to train the fast rollout policy. That's the one that runs in 2 microseconds. And they use that to train the supervised learning network. And then they have it play itself, and it winds up over here as the reinforcement learning network, which is a bit stronger. And then it plays itself many times, and they use that to generate the value network. So on the right here, you can see what these do. With the policy network, you take a position, and it outputs a list of moves that are interesting, and it assigns weights to them. So you know some moves it favors more than others. The taller green bars are going to be better moves here. And then on the right, the value network will look at a position, and it will tell you the chance that black or white is going to win the game from its position. Is my cursor visible? Can you guys see the arrow? Okay. All right, here we've got a graph that shows how it got stronger as it trained on the left. On the x-axis, we have its training accuracy on the data set of games that they used. So as it got better at predicting which moves would be played next, the strength of the program actually increased as well. This is how often the program won against the standard version of AlphaGo. And so you can see as it got better at predicting what the strong players on KGS would do, it actually won more games as well. On the right, we can see the effectiveness of predicting the winner using different strategies. So here on the bottom, we have the move number. Obviously, as we get closer to the end of the game, it should get easier to predict who's going to win. And here we have the mean squared error on the prediction. So 0.5 is purely random. And actually, we can see that this first policy is pretty terrible at predicting who's going to win. It's essentially the same as a random guess until you get really close to the end of the game. What this approach is starting from the current position, they play out the rest of the game 100 times, but as they play it out, they choose any legal move at random. So they're not doing anything intelligent about choosing those moves, and they get very little out of it. If you use the fast rollout policy, so they're using the neural network that runs quickly and predicts good moves, it turns out that's much better at predicting the winner. The green line is just using the value network. So this is not doing tree search. It's actually looking at just the possible moves from the current position and checking the value of each of those resulting positions and picking the best one. So it's looking one move ahead. And that works pretty well. It gets very predictive as you get closer to the end of the game. And then the supervised learning and reinforcement learning networks also are pretty good at predicting that as you get closer to the end of the game. Here's how the tree search works in AlphaGo. On the left, we've got a tree that AlphaGo has been exploring. And the way this works is we have a current position at the top. We have some possible moves here as branches, and then more possible moves below those, and so on. Each of these edges has a weight called an action value on it, and that represents how good we think the move is at this point. So in general, AlphaGo is going to choose the edges with the highest weight and then explore down those paths. So here, this is the maximum weight from this node. Here's the maximum weight from that node. And now it's going to evaluate the position here that it hasn't looked at before. So the first thing it does is create that position by making the move. And then it's going to run the slow policy network on this position. So that'll take 3 milliseconds. And it will come up with a list of candidate moves from there. Those moves will all get initial weights from the policy network based on how good it thinks those moves are. Next, it's going to further evaluate this position in 2 ways. One thing it's going to do is run the value network on this node and get an estimate of how good it is from that network. The other thing it's going to do is play out from that position to the end of the game as many times as it can. using the fast rollout network. So in this case, each prediction only takes 2 microseconds, and then it can follow those branches and explore this area of the tree. So it's going to run this a bunch of times, run the value network once on the position, and then it will take the data that it collected there and propagate that back up the tree. So if things turned out well on this branch, it will adjust these action values upward. If things went poorly, it will adjust them downward. And after it's spent its thinking time doing this in various parts of the tree, it will eventually choose a move. Here we can see its evaluation of one of the positions from the Games with Fun way. In the upper left here, we have the value network being run on each possible move. So lighter blue circles here are bad moves, and the darker the circle is, the better. The best move is the one circled in red here. It has a 54% chance of winning, according to the value network. You can see the other moves that had a 50% chance or better. There are only a handful, really. So this is what the value network thinks you should do if you just run a one move look ahead. In the second diagram here, we're using the value network, but we're actually exploring the tree. So we're doing the tree search, but we're not doing the rollouts where you play all the way to the end of the game. We're just using the value network on each node that we encounter and folding those values upward to update our information. So this is doing a bit of a deeper search. It still thinks the same move is the best, but it has changed its estimates for some of these moves. These are now a little bit below 50%. These moves over here that weren't so great before now look pretty good. And so it has a little bit of a different take on what should happen next. In the upper right here, this is using rollouts only, not using the value network. So in this case, we're taking the current position, playing out to the end of the game using the fast rollout network, and then gathering that information together to decide what move to play next. So you can see it has a different take on the game, right? It thinks this move is the best. It still has sort of the same list of decent moves, but which ones it thinks are better, it has a different opinion about which ones are better. So this is actually how most of the AIs worked before AlphaGo. They used pretty much this strategy. So you can see it would have played over here instead of playing the move on the lower right. In the lower left, we have the policy network. When we run that on the position, this is its initial suggestion of how good the moves are. So it's saying that this move looks really good, 60%. This move gets 35%, and the remaining 5% is broken up between these other moves. This is where AlphaGo actually spent its time. It spent 80% almost of its time on this move, 20% on this move, and very little on these three. And then here's the principal variation that AlphaGo predicted. The circled move is the move it actually played, and then the next 27 moves in the game are listed. So this is what AlphaGo thought should happen next. This was its opinion of the best moves for each player. And in the actual game, AlphaGo played the red move, and Funway played this move above it, which was not what AlphaGo expected. In his review after the game, though, he concluded that this was a mistake, and that he should have played the move that AlphaGo thought he was going to play. This graph on the left here shows the relative strengths of some of the Go AIs that are out there. There are two scales here. One is the ELO rating. This is like a chess rating. It works exactly the same way. And on the right, we have the traditional Go rankings. So starting from 7Q, the rankings actually go much lower than this, down to 30Q. But starting from 7Q, the numbers go down as the program gets stronger. And then once it's 1Q, it turns to 1 Dan, and the numbers start going up. And once you get to 9 Dan amateur, somewhere above that is the 1 Dan professional, and then up to 9 Dan professional, which is the top rank you can achieve. The professional ranks don't really work the same way as the amateur ranks. They're not based on handicap stones. The amateur ranks, if you're 3 ranks apart, it means you could give a 3-stone handicap to the weaker player. The professional ranks are more tightly packed than that. From top to bottom, the difference is probably only about 2.5 handicap stones. So those are a little bit different. GNU-Go is an older program, and it has the more traditional approach to AI. So it has a large opening database. It has a lot of pattern recognition code in it. And it took sort of the traditional approach, and it's around the level of 5K. So it's about like a decent club player. Fuego and Pachi are a bit stronger. They're around 1 or 2 Dan amateur. This is about where I fall as well. They both use the Monte Carlo tree search, and so they're playing games out to the end many times and choosing moves based on that. Crazy Stone and Zen, which lost its label for some reason, were the 2 best programs before AlphaGo came out, and they were around 6 Dan. That's a very strong level. I mean, those are pretty impressive. To give you an idea of that, I think there are about 4 or 5 players in Ohio that are that strong. So it's, that's pretty good. The pink bars here show how strong these programs are with a 4-stone handicap. AlphaGo gave them 4-stone handicaps when it was training against them because they weren't strong enough to beat it on their own. Fan Wei is the professional that played AlphaGo. His strength is somewhere in this range. He has a large error bar because they only played 10 games together. And then we have AlphaGo and AlphaGo distributed. So you can see that the jump here is maybe 5 or 6 stones in strength. It's a pretty big jump. But the other thing that's happening here that isn't immediately obvious is that the higher you get on the scale, the harder it is to make progress, right? It's relatively easy to get from 5K to, say, 1 Dan. A human can do that in a year if they're really dedicated. But to get from 1 Dan to, say, 6 Dan is not going to happen in a year. And to get from there to the level AlphaGo's playing at is definitely not going to happen in a year. Most professionals train for, say, 10 years before that happens. Whoops. Here in the middle, we have a graph showing how strong AlphaGo is with various pieces of it turned on. So there are 3 components, and if we only turn on one component, it gives us one of these strengths. This is with 2 components turned on, and this is the whole system. The thing that's really interesting on this diagram is the value network by itself is about as strong as the previous best programs. So that is pretty amazing. You can run the value network and get moves that are just as good as Crazy Stoner Zen, but it takes 1/15,000th of the computing power to come up with them. In the graph on the right, we see how much throwing horsepower at the problem helps. This group of bars on the left here is increasing the number of threads they're running, and so you can see it gets a bit stronger when you do that, quite a bit actually. Here we're holding constant the number of threads and adding more GPUs. I don't know if you guys have this video window blocking things, but I do. And so it gets stronger as we add GPUs. And over here with the distributed version, as we add more threads and more GPUs, it gets stronger again. It looks like there's probably a point of diminishing returns here. It's starting to level off as we get over to the right. Almost as impressive as what's in AlphaGo is what is not in AlphaGo. Many Go programs have a huge database of openings that helps them play well early in the game. AlphaGo has no opening book at all. It also has very little specific knowledge about Go. The inputs to the neural networks are the board position and things that are just completely obvious. The only things that are really specific to Go are these 4 things. It does know when stones are in Atari, which means that they're about to get captured. It does have some knowledge about Nakade patterns, which are clumps of stones that when they're captured will give a group an eye. It does emphasize moves close to recent moves, and it also does have a ladder search function. That's a case where you have a group of stones that's about to die and it's forced to make a single move, and there's a sequence of forcing moves like that. It will run down to the end of that sequence to see what happens. Other than that, it just applied general learning techniques to the input data. So most of what it did here will be applicable to lots of different problems. All right, so we're going to look at the games with AlphaGo and Fan Wei, and to do that, you need to know a little bit about Go. Anybody who doesn't play should still be able to follow this. I'm just going to tell you a few basic things you need to know so that this makes sense to you. So in Go, the players take turns putting stones on the board. The stones never move around. They can be captured and removed from the board if they get completely surrounded. The spaces next to the stones are called liberties. So the squares mark the liberties for these white groups. And orthogonally connected stones share their liberties. So these 2 stones have 6 liberties, and they will either live or die together. If all of the liberties get filled, the stone will come off the board. So here we see a bunch of white groups that are in Atari. That is when they have 1 liberty left, and on Black's next move, Black could capture one of these groups. If Black plays those moves, then the white stones come off the board. Black can't play all 4 of these at once, obviously. That would take 4 turns. And each of those captured stones will be worth a point for Black at the end of the game. A lot of the driver of strategy in Go is the threat of capturing stones. If White's in Atari and White wants to get away, White can add a new stone to the groups and get out into the open and gain more liberties. So this stone that had 1 liberty before is now connected to this stone, and there are 3 liberties. So that's what you have to do if you don't want that stone to get captured. There's a situation you can get into in Go called Ko, which can lead to an infinite loop. So here we have a position where this white stone is in danger, and if black plays, black can capture that stone. But the position is symmetrical, and so now the black stone on the right is in danger, and white could recapture. So we could just go back and forth like this all day if neither player is willing to concede the Ko. So there's a rule in the game that you can't repeat the whole board position, and that means that once black captures, white can't recapture immediately. White must play somewhere else to change the state of the game, and then if the Ko is still there on white's next turn, he could come back and recapture the Ko. All right, so that's actually important strategically because you can get into a fight where the Ko fight actually matters, and then black takes first. White has to find a threat somewhere else that's big enough to get black to answer, and if black answers, white can come take the Ko back, and they'll go back and forth like this for some time until the Ko gets resolved. One more thing you need to know, a group with two eyes is alive. So this white group here is completely surrounded by black, but black can never take it off the board because white has two internal liberties. And if black were to play on one of those points, the black stone that was just played would have no breathing spaces, right? It would have no liberties, and so it would die immediately. That would be a suicidal move. And actually, in most rule sets, that's not even allowed. So because black can't take both of these points at the same time, there's no way to ever kill this white group. So a lot of the fighting in Go is about whether a group has two eyes or not. If it has two eyes, it's safe. If it can't get two eyes, it probably will die. There's some other sort of edge cases where you can live without eyes, but we won't worry about those right now. At the end of the game, you get points according to how much territory you've surrounded. So here's a white territory. White will get a point for each of these intersections that's surrounded. You also get points for dead stones. So this black group has been agreed to be dead by both players, and those black stones would come off the board. So for each of these points, white will get the point of territory plus the stone that he took off the board. White also gets 6.5 points that are called komi, which is to make up for the fact that black gets to move first. And in a pro game, games tend to be very close. So a win by 0.5 point is considered a toss-up. A win by 1.5 points is considered a decent win. And a win by 2.5 points is a situation where you actually had the lead and you're just playing well and bringing it down to the end of the game. That does not happen in amateur games. Amateur games are won and lost by 20 points all the time. All right, I am not strong enough at Go to have come up with the game commentary we're going to look at. Myung-Won Kim did an analysis of the games between AlphaGo and Fanway last week, and so a lot of the things I'm going to tell you about the games are his insights. So let's take a look at those. So here we have the first game. When Fanway started playing AlphaGo, he thought, I will just play a calm and peaceful game, and I'm just going to play more efficient moves than the computer, and I will beat it that way. And so this game doesn't have a lot of fighting in it. Game starts out like this. This move's a little bit notable because it's slightly out of date. Fanway said that AlphaGo must be a Japanese player from about 10 years ago. This move was commonly played then in Japan. It's not really played anymore. So the opening goes peacefully. Both players are just sort of staking out parts of the board. And up to this point, nothing too exciting has happened. Black's sort of sketching out the right side. White's got some space, potential space at the top and the bottom on the left side. This move's probably a mistake because it lets black seal off the entire corner in one move. And then AlphaGo plays over here. AlphaGo is white. And then plays a move that looks more like a mistake. So this is a very slow move. It makes white safe, but it also doesn't put any pressure on black at all and lets black go wherever he wants. That's called sente. When you have the initiative in a Go game, that's called sente. That means you don't have to answer the last move. You can do something new. So Myung-Won Kim says that maybe white should try to get this move down, which will protect the lower side. That's very big right now. So maybe white should try to find some moves that black will have to answer that makes his group a little stronger and then come take this point. But he didn't do that. AlphaGo made this extension and then black invades. This is a very big move. So you can see here white loses all of his potential at the bottom in this sequence. Basically the potential white territory is now potential black territory, and AlphaGo is behind by about 10 points now in the game. So this is really the only time we see Fanway with the lead in the game. Another thing that AlphaGo might have done differently, this move here, almost any Go player would answer this move by connecting solidly. But really top professionals get to the point where they don't make those automatic moves anymore and they're more creative. It turns out that this move may actually be better, even though it lets black sort of break white's position up. Here, these white stones can all be cut because they're only connected diagonally. And even though that's true, this position turns out to be better for white than the way that AlphaGo actually played. So this happens, and AlphaGo has fallen behind. And then we play a bunch of other moves. And at this point in the game, AlphaGo is still behind and has to get some territory in the center here to be able to win this game. So AlphaGo tries to do that, starts building a wall. And at this point, Fanwei makes a mistake. This move is actually the losing move of the game. If he had played here, it would have been harder for white to get territory in this area. But because he played there, white forces him and then gets this stone down. And with this 5-stone wall, white is able to make a few points in the center and winds up pulling the game out. So here at the end, white gets these 3 points, and white wins the game by 2.5. So it's a close game. Fanwei had the lead and then lost it slowly. And AlphaGo made a couple of really good moves toward the end. So this is the first time this had ever happened, right? A professional had never been beaten in an even game. In fact, the closest victory of that kind had been with a 4-stone handicap, which is about a 40-point head start. So this was a huge advance for AI. Fanwei was shocked. So in the next game, he decided he should take a different tack. He thought maybe AlphaGo is just really good at the peaceful game, trying to take territory and playing the end game, finding the biggest moves in the end game to end the game with a slight lead. And so he decided he would be much more aggressive in the second game. He decided he would fight from the very beginning. So in this game, AlphaGo is black, and the players play this sequence out in the upper right. This is a standard sequence. This is called a joseki. It's a sequence that comes up in a lot of games, and it's considered to be the best sequence for both players, which is why it happens over and over. At this point in the joseki, AlphaGo sacrifices a black stone, and white answers. And normally black would play here and give up an extra stone. AlphaGo doesn't do that. And it's interesting to think about why. So the position winds up looking like this. And much later in the game, maybe 100 moves later, this black group may come under attack. It doesn't have clear eyes yet, and so it's possible that it could be killed. And white may get some extra moves because white can put pressure on this group. If black had the stone here that was sacrificed, then this black group would actually be safer because the white stone being short of liberties here gives black more leverage. It means that this black group would be alive. So this is maybe a flaw in AlphaGo, a weakness. AlphaGo can't see the connection between this common move and the fact that it doesn't pay off until 100 moves later. Maybe it's not making that connection. There aren't a lot of weaknesses here, so we have to take what we can get. All right, so Fanwei is white, and Fanwei is being extremely aggressive here in this game. He goes ahead and picks a fight in the upper left, and this is very complicated. And then at this point, he makes an extremely aggressive move, which is an overplay. And AlphaGo jumps on it. So AlphaGo plays here, and what happens is the player's stones get cut apart. So stones that are connected diagonally are not actually connected. So this group is separate from these 3, and these are separate, and then this group is separate. So black has 4 separate groups of stones here. White stones are cut apart. This group, and this group are not connected. And so when there are that many groups close together that are all separated, something's going to die usually. It turns out in this case, the fight is going to go AlphaGo's way. So AlphaGo gets this black group out into the open, so it's not in danger of immediate capture, and then comes back and cuts here and winds up capturing these 3 stones. So since these stones are dead, that means that all the black stones around them are now effectively connected. It also means that these 2 white stones are in a lot of danger, and it's likely that black will get this territory. These white stones don't have enough space to make 2 eyes, so this entire area has become black's territory, this whole left corner. That means white's in a lot of trouble in this game. At this point in the game, actually, white's chief asset is this white wall. All right, he's got a wall facing the center, and so for white to have any hope here, white needs to make a large territory in the center of the board. Because of that, most humans at this point would just play this move, which greatly reduces white's potential and almost makes the game unplayable. You're basically just saying to your opponent, resign, you have lost. There's also a proverb about that in Go, rich men don't fight, which is telling you that if you have the lead, you should keep the game simple so that you don't screw it up, right? AlphaGo does not subscribe to this philosophy. AlphaGo is going to play the best move at all times. So AlphaGo goes ahead and plays this aggressive move, slightly more aggressive move, and picks a fight. And you can see here, white's starting to build a wall to help work on that center territory. Then they have a little bit of an exchange in the lower right corner, where white makes a living group, and then black plays here to keep his group safe. And then white goes to expand the center, as you would expect. So white is, looking at sort of this whole area. If white can get all of that, maybe white can win. AlphaGo plays this move, and white invades this corner. And then they have an exchange where white is trying to get enough space for two eyes. So the question here is whether these stones can make two eyes or not. At this point in the game, AlphaGo actually has a move that would win the game immediately. If AlphaGo played here, then white would capture that stone, and black could draw back. And this white group in the corner would actually die. This looks like an eye, but it's what's called a false eye. And there's not enough room for two eyes on the edge here. So this whole white group would be dead, and the game would be over. AlphaGo didn't play that way, though. AlphaGo played this move and let white live in the corner. So at this point, white's group is safe. And now AlphaGo makes a series of moves that really feel human to me. Clearly, a human looking at this game sees that the center is the issue, but usually programs don't seem to notice these things. At this point, though, the AI starts working its way into the center from various directions. So it comes in from the top, it starts to come in from the left side, comes in from the top a little more, and then tries to come in from the bottom. And at this point, if white lets this stone survive, he's not going to have enough space to win the game. So he has to fight. So he cuts that stone off, and then he plays this way to cut off these three stones. So at this point, these three stones are kind of floating in this space that has a lot of white stones around. They're in danger. And if they die, white might have enough territory to win the game. AlphaGo puts a little pressure on these two stones, so they extend. He threatens to connect to his other stone over here, and white prevents that. And then he pushes out into the center. So the big question here is whether these 5 stones can survive or not. These white stones are in some danger, so Fanwei is going to play this move to protect them. AlphaGo threatens these 4 stones, which can be cut off right here, so white has to connect those. AlphaGo puts a little pressure on these 3 stones to get a forcing move. And then we see AlphaGo's true goal when it attaches here. It's actually trying to kill this entire white group on the right. And it actually has succeeded. Fanwei squirms around and tries to find a way out of this problem. But at this point, the stones have been separated. So these white stones are surrounded, and the black stones here don't have any eyes, and they really have nowhere to run to that they can make eyes or attach to a living black group. So one of these 2 groups has to die, and it mostly comes down to a race between which group has more liberties. Whoever's liberties get filled up first will die, and white loses this race. So at this point, Fanwei can see that that's what's going to happen, and he resigns the game. So now he's 0-2, and he's becoming discouraged. He said at this point that he realized that he was getting tired and discouraged and emotional about this, and that AlphaGo was not. So he was concerned that he was going to lose the rest of the games. But he didn't really see much hope in beating AlphaGo by playing slow and careful, so he continued to fight. In this game, AlphaGo is white, and again, black picks a fight. So Fanwei is picking a fight right away. We wind up in this position here, and black pushes out and separates this white group from its neighbors. So this group has no eye shape, right? It's just kind of a string of stones. So AlphaGo needs to protect it somehow. So he starts to push across the top here and make it a little stronger. But this helps black build a large territory in the corner. This is looking really good for Fanwei. AlphaGo invades and then winds up playing these stones on the left. So these stones have connected to this, and that means that black lost a little bit of the huge territory, but actually the rest of this has become more solid. So this is pretty good for Fanwei. Then AlphaGo makes a mistake, actually. These 2 moves don't make any sense in this position. They come up a lot in pro games, and so they look like good moves, but it turns out that because black is so strong over here, these moves don't actually make sense. So AlphaGo may have learned these moves from looking at patterns and is playing them here where it's not actually appropriate. But at this point, AlphaGo picks a fight. So here he cuts the black stones into two groups. These two stones are isolated, and this group is isolated and almost alive. It has some eye shape here, so it's not in a whole lot of trouble. Fanwei decides he's going to attack this white group. So this white group actually doesn't have any eyes yet, and if he can cut through somewhere like here, this group will die. A lot of players might just connect. This would protect this connection and make sure all the white stones stay together. But AlphaGo comes up with a much better move. This move attacks the black stones and helps to protect the connection as well. This is really a top pro move. I mean, this is not something that even your run-of-the-mill professional is going to play in a match like this. Fanwei threatens to cut these stones off, and many players would just play here, which keeps the stones connected. Black could play here, but white would just take the stones, so it doesn't do any good. But AlphaGo has a better idea. AlphaGo plays here. This move is sort of driving these black stones into this white wall, so it's threatening the black stones, but it's also protecting the cut at the same time. So if black makes the cut that he has threatened, white can threaten this stone. He will have to connect if he wants to keep the stones separated. Then white threatens these two stones. Well, if they get captured, then all these white stones would be connected, so that's no good. Black has to connect. And then white plays here, and now we see that that previous move is in just the right spot. If black tries to escape, white can put these stones in Atari. They only have this one breathing space left. And if black extends, white will capture the stones. So the cut was not effective. Even after this move, if black attaches, when AlphaGo plays here, the cut still doesn't work. It's a little harder to see. White can threaten this stone, threaten the two stones, and then play here. Now when Fanwei tries to squirm his way out, this white stone is actually in danger, right? It can be captured on the next move. So a weaker player would connect, and black would escape. But what AlphaGo would do is play this Atari. So these black stones here are almost dead, and if he plays here, he will just die. So his only move is to capture the white stone. White can force him to connect with this Atari. These stones are in danger again, and they have to connect. And then this is Atari, and black's only escape is here, and Atari, and escape. And white can actually run black around to this point where all the black stones die again. So back here, AlphaGo saw all of this coming when it played this move. So black plays some more forcing moves in this area, and finally after this exchange, the cut now works. So if black plays here, he will be able to kill all of these white stones. Again, you might expect AlphaGo to make the simple connection. It does not. It finds an even better move. This move is amazing. It does three things at once. For one thing, it connects these two stones to the corner and makes some territory here. Another thing it does is it saves the white group in case of a cut. So if black cuts, white can actually play here, and now these two stones are connected. And it makes these stones stronger, which makes this black group nearly dead. So that move does all those things in one move, and that is the key to good Go. It's all about efficiency, so if you can find a move that does three things, you should just play it. So at this point, Fanwei plays some moves to keep his black group alive. He doesn't want to just give up this whole territory. And at the end of this sequence, AlphaGo finally goes back and fixes the cutting point. So instead of just connecting meekly like Fanwei wanted him to, he played these moves, which gained power on the outside and will help him make territory in this area later. He played this move, which gained him territory in the corner and made black's group weak. Black's group actually isn't quite alive yet. And then he finally comes back and connects and keeps these stones safe. So now black is in trouble. White actually picks a fight over here. Black ignores it, and white kills this, which means this whole area is now white's territory. And the game doesn't get better for Fanwei after that. These are more or less normal moves. Finally, toward the end of the game, AlphaGo goes after this black group, which doesn't have two eyes yet. And when he plays this encircling move, there's no way for this black group to escape. Black tries to get out, but white just backs up like this, and it turns out this black group has nowhere to go and not enough space to make two eyes. So Fanwei resigns. Fourth game, Fanwei is fighting again. He doesn't quit. This game has a really interesting move in it. So at this point in the game, this is the game that actually makes me really terrified to try playing AlphaGo. At this point in the game, AlphaGo plays this move. And this looks like a mistake initially. Almost any player would play here. Even I would probably have found this move. It attacks this whole white group. After this move, this white group has half of an eye. If it plays a move, if white spends a move, white can make one eye here, and that's all they can get. So white will have to run away and struggle to make more eyes. Black can chase him around. So this is a really good move. It puts a lot of pressure on white. But AlphaGo chooses not to make it. And it seems like that's a mistake. So white makes his group safe, and then they make a couple of exchanges, and then black invades at the top. White attaches, and they make this sequence. And now here, black has jumped into white's space and has this small group. And if this group can make two eyes, white will have lost a lot of territory. So almost any white player is going to play this move, trying to kill the black group, keep it from getting enough room to make eyes. The sequence, though, will go like this. Black threatens a stone and then cuts here. White has to extend here to keep black from getting two eyes, and black has to play here to answer that. White takes care of this stone, and then this group looks like it's dead at the top. But it turns out AlphaGo had a plan here. He's going to push, and when white blocks, AlphaGo sacrifices a stone, and then plays here, forcing this move, and then captures the two white stones. And at this point, it becomes clear that what AlphaGo is doing is trying to kill this entire white group. All right, so this black group has only one eye, so it can't live independently. And this white group has no eyes. This one's actually false, so it can't live independently. And now it's a race to see which group has more liberties. So white has to connect here. Black will fill this liberty. And if white approaches the black group from this side, this clump of white stones has only this one breathing space, so black will capture it. So white can't approach from this side. White has to come from the other side. Black takes away a liberty. White takes a liberty. Black takes a liberty. White has to connect over here. Black takes another liberty. White can sacrifice a stone here to make black short of liberties, and then play Atari. So now this black group is almost dead. On the next move, white can play here and kill it. But it turns out by playing here, white has taken his own liberty. He only has one, and black can kill it. So this is a really complicated capturing race. Actually, that's not the only variation. That's just the main variation. There are other branches you would have to consider. So this is a complicated race that black wins by one move, and it means that black can live here. So instead of trying to kill the group, Fanwei reads that out and winds up backing off, and black makes a living group at the top, and white has lost all of this territory. So this is basically giving black a big lead in the game. Now, the crazy thing is that back here, black played this move that looked like a mistake so that he would have the initiative and be able to go up and invade the top. So it read not only what was going on in this area, but it also knew that the next thing to do was go invade the top. It saw that whole sequence and the fact that it could kill this white group, and made its decision based on that reading, that analysis. That's pretty crazy. All right, so the game goes on, and AlphaGo winds up playing one more very exciting move here toward the end. Right here, AlphaGo cuts these two white groups apart. This white group has no eyes, and it basically has nowhere to run to get eyes. There are black stones out here that it's going to run into. And this white group in the corner is actually in danger as well. So when white cuts these off and black connects, white's in a lot of trouble. AlphaGo throws in, and then plays this move to connect to his friends above. And at this point, Fanwei resigns because at least one of these white groups is going to die, and maybe both of them. He gave it one more go, but it was not to be. So here, AlphaGo is white, and this is an interesting one. This feels like a human to me also. So right here, at this point in the game, this white group is alive on the left. It's safe. But AlphaGo plays this move, and when black answers and white leaves, this group is now in danger. All right, so black can come back and attack this group. That may be a mistake. Youngwon Kim seemed to think this was a mistake by AlphaGo, but it sure works out well for him later. Here, black attacks the group, and AlphaGo starts to run away, and then they play a couple more moves, and then AlphaGo comes back to this area. Now, almost any player would play here, killing these two stones, which gets one eye, and then there would be another eye here. So this whole white group would be safe after this move. Instead, AlphaGo pushes out through this hole and starts cutting black stones apart. So it plays Atari on this stone. Black decides to trade. Black captures this stone and lets white have the other one. And that means that white's group is in danger, actually. This white group doesn't have any eyes. This is a false eye. And so white needs to get stronger and protect his group. So after this exchange, AlphaGo plays this move to make the group stronger. And at this point, Fan Wei plays this move threatening the entire white group. He's saying, answer my move or I will kill all of your stones. But AlphaGo calls his bluff. AlphaGo plays down here, taking a huge number of points. So look at the difference between that and this. If black plays here, black gets around 15 points in this area, and white will get maybe, say, 10 in the corner here, maybe 6. And if white gets this move instead, white gets the same 6 plus another 4 plus these 6. So the swing is, 20 or more points. It's a very, very big move. The only question is, was Fan Wei bluffing or not, right? Can AlphaGo keep these stones alive now that he's ignored a move? So black follows up by attacking further, and then AlphaGo shows us what his plan is. Black is chasing the group, but when white comes out here, it turns out that all of a sudden these stones are in trouble. And so Fan Wei has to defend them as well as try to keep the white group sealed in, and he can't do both. So white starts to snake out here, winds up capturing a single stone here. Black's still trying to surround him. If black can get some stones out here and keep white in, white's going to die. But he pushes out, and then AlphaGo makes a couple of really good forcing moves and plays this move. And at this point, white can't be sealed in. White can either connect to his friends over here or run out this direction and make eyes. So the bluff has been called, and Fan Wei is behind again. This game goes on. There's one more interesting thing here, which is a co-fight. So at this point in the game, AlphaGo is ahead, clearly ahead. And so most players would just back off and play the safe move and let black survive in the corner. AlphaGo doesn't do that. AlphaGo is coming after you. So black starts a co-fight. And here we can see the co that could go back and forth, right? So to make this move, you have to know where all the threats are on the board, how big they are, what order things are going to get played out in, and decide that what you get out of it is more than what you're putting into it, right, for this to make sense. And AlphaGo apparently has done his homework. So AlphaGo takes the ko. Black has to make a threat somewhere else. So Fan Wei threatens here. White answers. Black takes the ko. White makes a threat. Black answers. White takes the ko. This goes back and forth for a while. And then finally, AlphaGo makes this threat, and Fan Wei ignores it and wins the ko battle. So this black group is now safe in the corner, and white has lost his potential territory around here. The exchange is white gets to follow up the threat and capture these 4 stones. It turns out this is actually bigger than the ko. So AlphaGo gained in this exchange. By killing these 4 stones, these stones, which were previously surrounded and dead, now come back to life. And so AlphaGo has extended its lead by making this exchange. From here, Fan Wei threatens these stones on the left, and white actually ignores him and plays over here, taking a bigger point. And then Fan Wei gets to capture this white group. But it doesn't matter that much. At this point, the game is basically over. They play a few more moves, and then Fan Wei resigns. So 5-0 in the first outing against a human professional. That's pretty impressive. What did AlphaGo do right? Well, it plays like a human, this is the first time I've seen that. I've played a lot of the other Go AIs, and they don't feel like humans. You play a sequence in an area, and it seems like you're both trying to achieve some goal there, and then suddenly the computer goes and plays somewhere else. It's like it's lost its mind. It's very good at fighting. Fan Wei fought as hard as he could for 4 games and got nowhere. If you actually look at the score in those games and how the lead is changing, it's steadily increasing. AlphaGo is gaining more and more points the longer they play. It is good at fighting ko's. That ko battle at the end was risky and complicated, and it played it correctly. And it's also very good at reading. In the 4th game, we saw that it read something like 30 or 40 moves ahead to make a decision about where to play next, and it made a good decision there. It does have a few weaknesses, it seems. It looks like AlphaGo plays a little bit too soft. In the first game, Fan Wei didn't pick any fights, and AlphaGo fell behind, so it made some mistakes. It does follow patterns sometimes when they're not appropriate, so there are a few cases where that happened. And it may have problems seeing the impact of a move far down the road. So there was that Joseki move that doesn't really have an effect for 100 moves, and AlphaGo didn't seem to understand that. So there may be some chinks in its armor that we can still attack. So what's going to happen next? A match has been set up in March where AlphaGo is going to play Lee Sedol. Lee Sedol is unbelievably strong. He's the best player of the last decade. He's won the second most titles in history, I believe. And there's $1 million on the line. So if he wins, he will be paid $1 million. So that should get him to play his best Go. Google is putting this on, and everyone is very anxious to see what happens in both the Go and AI communities. What is going to happen? Well, if you ask the pros, they almost all say that Lee Sedol will win. I agree that if the AlphaGo that we saw here plays Lee Sedol, it will probably lose. I'm not sure that we're going to see exactly the same program, though. AlphaGo played Fan Wei in October, and Google just announced it last week. So by the time of the match in March, it will have had 5 months to improve. I'm not sure how much they can improve, but I think they've only been working on this project for about a year. So 5 months could be a significant amount of improvement. AlphaGo also wasn't trained on pro games. They took a bunch of strong amateur games and trained it on that. I'm not sure what would happen if they took a huge pro game database and trained it on that instead, but it seems to me that that would make the program stronger. And then it is Google that's running this, right? So there's a question of how much horsepower they want to throw at the problem. It looked like there's a point of diminishing returns in the graphs that showed, adding CPUs and adding GPUs. But this is Google, so if they decided to say, shut down google.com for the day and apply all of their horsepower to this problem, we might see a truly terrifying result. So this is the next step in the battle. The victory against Fan Wei is a huge victory, and it's a huge jump forward in strength. I don't want to make that seem like it's not a big deal. It's a very big deal. This is just a program beating a pro. Any pro was something that people didn't think would happen for 10 years. But that happened already. The next step is just as big, probably. Getting from a low-level pro to the best pro in the world is quite a task. So if Lee Sedol loses this match convincingly, if AlphaGo wins in convincing fashion, then it will probably be a situation like Kasparov and Deep Blue, where we say, okay, computers are just better than us at Go now. So tune in March and see what happens next. Here are some links if you want more information. Does anybody have any questions?
I had a question. When they're training the neural network, do you know what the output they were training against? Is it strength of the board position, or is it just whether they ended in a winning game, losing game, or?
Yeah, so for the first network, the ones that are policy networks, the structured learning network was trained to try to predict the next move in the games that they had in their sample. Okay. So they would give it a position in the middle of that game and say, what's the next move going to be? So it was trained to predict the next move. Okay. Now they realized that that wasn't the strongest thing to do, so they built the other network, the reinforcement learning one, and they tried to train that one to choose the best move. And so the way they tuned that network was by how many games it won against the older version of the network.
Okay.
And then the value network predicts who's going to win. So they train that according to the result of the game. They would give it a position and then say, who do you think is going to win? And they know who actually did win, so they can train it according to that.
Was it given the entire board or just a segment of it?
Yes. Yeah, it's given the entire board position and the history up to that point.
I see. Okay.
And then it has to predict who's going to win. All right.
Can't hear you, David.
Uh-oh. Yeah, I can't hear you still. Your mic's up.
Can those networks run in parallel, or do they have to run, sequentially, linearly?
I'm not sure how parallelizable they would be. It seems like each neuron is independent, right? It has just inputs and outputs. So you probably could split the network up onto multiple machines pretty easily. But yeah, I don't know how much that would help, or if really running the network is the bottleneck. I think the way that they made it distributed is for the tree search part. So I think the actual just running of the networks didn't take that much time, except for the part where it's searching the tree and running the games out to the end. And so in that case, that's what they split up across multiple machines. So they sent different parts of the tree to explore off to different machines and let them run out to the end of the game, and then collected that information.
That is freaking cool.
I sure think so. I just want to be able to play it. Although I really only need to play it a couple of times and then I'll give up. All right. Well, thanks everybody.
Thank you. That was
Thanks,
great.
man.
Thank you.